What do you mean by pure functions? So you don't remember? Very bad.
Sir, your voice is breaking, sir.
My voice is breaking.
Yes, sir. You're not properly audible. Sir,
Okay, how about now?
yes, sir. Now it's fine.
Okay, good. So in our previous class, we were discussing about classes and functions. And we also try to categorize two different types of functions. One is pure functions, the other one is modifiers. So I had asked you a simple question. What do you mean by a pure function? So this was dealt in your previous class. What is pure function?
Sir, if a function returns same values, then it is uh, it's a pure function.
Okay, so okay, somewhat. Uh, Guys, I need some kind of attention here, because if you don't learn these concepts, object-oriented programming concepts in Python, it's of no use that you guys have learned lists, dictionaries, tuples, operating on different data types, data structures. So it's of no use. You have to make sure that you learn these concepts. I'm not gone into object-oriented programming concepts yet, but you have to understand what do you mean by classes, what do you mean by objects, that we have discussed in the last two sessions. And in the very previous session, we have discussed about classes and functions. In functions, we were discussing about something called pure functions and modifiers. Again, I'm trying to repeat what we have done in your previous class. See, the pure functions are the functions which take some input argument. And what are those input arguments? Okay, the functions that create a new object. Okay, you call it as a pure function and returns a reference to a new object. Here in this example, can you see this is a class time which I have defined, and I have defined a function called add underscore time. So inside add function, inside this function, I call it as a prototype. Pure function are also called as prototype. Okay, and modifiers are also called as patch. Now you could observe here inside this function, what I'm giving two input arguments to this function. That is objects. I'm giving two objects as an input arguments, and these objects are untouched. I'm not modifying any values of the attributes of these objects. Understand? The behavior of these objects remains same. Whereas inside the function, I create another object and I add these two values to sum.hover, t1.hover with t2.hover. The attributes of hover being added been stored in a new attribute or a new object called sum.hover. Likewise, minute and second, and it will return what? It will return another object. Okay. And if you could see here, if I run this program, now I would be creating an instance of time called start. I will start watching a movie at 8:30:01, and then I'm going to update an attribute start.hover. I'm going to assign a values to the attribute to hour, minute, and second. So I'll just try to record the movie length also in terms of duration. I'm going to create another instance called duration, another time instance duration, and going to give an attributes of hour, minute, and second. So I started watching the movie at 8:30:01 second. Okay. And the duration of the movie, the length of the movie was 2 hours 20 minutes 30 seconds. So now I'm going to call this function, guys, add underscore time. I created a function here, add underscore time. Now what is T1 and T2? T1 and T2 are start and duration. T1, T2 are objects with attributes, hour, minute, and second each. So here T1.hour plus T2.hour will be added, and I'll be getting start dot second is equal to 0, 1 is invalid. Okay. Print underscore time is not defined, or I had to call it as print underscore my time. Okay, now you could observe these two values have been added, 8 plus 2 with respect to an hour, 30 plus 20 with respect to minute, and 1 with respect to seconds, 31. So what do you mean by a modifier? A modifier is the function which modifies, okay, the function which modifies the input object. Oh, we are not dealt with modifiers in the last class then. Guys, we are not dealt with modifiers in the last class, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Yes.
fine. So let me again clarify this. What do you mean by a pure function? Pure function will try to create another object inside the function, and this T1, T2, which are an alias to the start and duration, are untouched. Okay, the objects remain same. The input objects remains same with respect to your function. Now, what if, see here, what if I give the values for a minute? Suppose if I'm going to start watching a movie around 8:40. Okay, I try to watch a movie from 8:40. So what is the output? The output is 10 o'clock 16 minutes 31, and which looks very weird, which is not acceptable. So rather it should be 11 o'clock 0th minute 31 second, right? I hope you're following this.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so now if I want to bring it to the actual format. So this is not an acceptable format. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to include some conditional statements like this, where if sum dot second exceeds 60, if sum dot second exceeds what 60 count, I should decrement the sum dot second and increment the minute with 1. Correct? And if it happens to be with the minute, if minute exceeds 60, so I'll decrement 60 values from minute and increment the hour. So now if I run this program, and then yeah, this is also fine. Previously what I gave, 841, 220, 30. 841, this is 40, and this was 1, and this was 220 and 30. 220 and 30. Now I've created a function called inc underscore add underscore time, which takes two input objects and it creates new object inside the function and returns the new object. So this is called pure function. But a small change I have done here, just in order to make sure my hour, minute and seconds are in a right count or a right values. I have to say print underscore my time. Now this is acceptable. Correct? Likewise, you could change some values here and you can see if it is 60 and say 60. With respect to 60 seconds changing, you could see this is an acceptable format. Correct? Any doubt here with respect to pure functions? So now let us go to modifiers. What happens if I give something which is unusual, say something like this, or say here, if it exceeds 60, or I can keep it as 80 also. What happens in this case? See here, again this is an unacceptable format. Why? Because it will check, this is checked only once. This will check for a second. 80 plus 60 is how much? 140. So it will reduce 60. Here you could see it will reduce 60, so it becomes 40, right? So 60 is reduced, so it remained 80. So I'm getting this 80 count here with respect to seconds. See, 60 plus 80 is 140. 140 minus 60 here. 140 minus 60. Why? Because it is verifying only once. See here, if some dots second exceeds 60, now it is 140 here. So if it exceeds 60, what it will do? It will reduce second by 60. That means I'll be having a new value for second as 80. And minute, of course, minute has been incremented by 1. But in an actual scenario, what should happen? It should happen twice, right? Minute should be incremented by 2 and this should be 20, correct? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
So what I'm going
While
to
loop,
use,
sir.
yeah, good. So this, I guess I've said it in the last class. So you can use
Yes, sir.
while loop so that you can still be inside that loop so that this is in the acceptable form. Now you check. Now instead of 11,180, you should get 11,220. Okay, yeah. So you'll get 11,220. Most of the times we don't give this kind of input, so not to worry. But sometimes if a user while accessing or while trying to give the input data to the Excel or something like that, instead of giving 2120, right, he gave 8020. So that might be an error from the user side. So let us see how to deal with it by replacing if loop by while loop. So this is always good. So let me just have a two separate program, one dealing with the while loop, one dealing with the if loop. Okay. Now I'll take this. Yeah. So now let us try to, what happened here, 6031. It should be inc underscore add. So now let me just try to discuss more about modifiers. There's the only difference between modifiers and pure function is I don't use this kind of syntax or the objects inside the function. Rather, I would just simply add the values or change the values to these attributes of object. So what do you mean by modifiers? So sometimes it is always useful for a function to modify the object itself and the parameter it gets. So functions which modifies the objects is called as modifiers. Let me just try to define the same function here. So this is my function now. This is a very simple function. What is happening here? Can anybody notice? Yes, what is happening here? Guys,
Sir, hover is incremented by one, sir. Like
yeah,
if minutes
here,
predicted, the hour becomes 1 plus.
see here, what are the input? What are the input to this function? Let me just borrow those inputs from here. Okay, so I have created a time object. Start is equal to time, correct? And start dot hover. I have just initiated the attribute called hover, minute, and second, correct? And now I want to increment only by seconds. See here, if I just try to say seconds is equal to 60. So what, and I will call a function called, sum. Otherwise, I'll call uh, output out is equal to, I use this now, increment. I'll call this function by its name of, what input I'll give? I'll give start, comma, 60. And I say print underscore my time out. I'm just trying to add, I'm just trying to add, oh no attribute called hover here. Is there any problem, guys, here? 1 second. One second. I had the same problem in the last class also. So yeah, just try to rectify what is the problem. Can anybody tell what is the problem here? Guys, what is the problem here? Hello?
Sir, hover is become none type, sir.
Huh?
None type. Sir. One is time plus hour is equal to 1 into.
Because this function was not returning anything. Correct? Hello? I
Yes,
did
sir.
not put any return value here. It should return some object, right? And what is that object here? It is time. What is time here? So the start has been modified. Time is alias to start. You just check start also. Can you see? So what has happened here? So here basically, guys, again observe. I've defined an increment function which takes input arguments as an object and the seconds. What is seconds? I'm just trying to update my time with seconds. Correct? So if second exceeds 60, I'm going to follow the same logic. I'll decrement the second by 60 and I'll increment the minute by 1. Likewise, minute exceeds 60, I'll decrement minute value by 60 and the hour by increment hour by 1. But if you can observe, this time is an alias to start. Correct? What is start here? Start is an input object. And this object itself is modified. See here, this time I'm not creating a new object called sum is equal to something like this. I'm not creating this kind of an object here and not trying to change this object inside the function. Rather, I'm going to change the input object itself directly. Right? And the seconds is time dot seconds. Likewise, you can also have time dot minute, time dot hour. Time dot hour is equal to, sorry, plus is equal to, you can replace this statement. Instead of time dot second, you can have minutes as well. Sorry, hours as well. But seconds make some meaning. So I'm just created this function using incrementing the seconds. So this modifiers example I've taken just to increment with seconds, increment time with seconds. That's it. Okay, just in order to make you people understand, the input object here is start, which is an alias to time of a function. Okay, and it returns the time. Why? Because it is modifying the object itself. Guys understand? It is modifying the object itself inside the function. Okay, any doubt here?
No, sir.
Okay, so now what happens if the seconds is much greater than 60? And this I guess I've dealt. What happens if the seconds are much greater than 60? I'm just directly giving that input here. So in order to avoid this, in order to avoid this, what you need to do, you just try to replace this by while loop. Yeah. Okay. If while, I think you're quite familiar with this now. What happens if it is if? What happens if it is while? Okay. So now here the pure functions which you have created. Understand? Let me just try to put it here. Say yes or no if I ask you the question now. Pure functions, it modifies the input object. True or false?
False.
Okay. Pure function creates its own objects inside the function and modifies it. Right? Whereas modifiers, what happens? Modifiers modifies the input object, modifies the object itself, right? Which is given as an input argument. Correct? Remember these 2 points. The function creates its own objects inside the function and modifies it. Modifiers modifies the object itself, which is given as an it was given as an input argument. Okay. So now let us just try to deal with the industrial concepts of prototyping versus planning. So what do you suggest, guys? Like, what do you say between pure function and modifiers? Which is better? Can anybody say which is better?
Modifiers, sir.
Okay, so you say modifiers are better. Why? Because creating the objects inside the functions might lead to some kind of increasing the length of the programming, and you're trying to return the objects which are modified. But most of the times I recommend that you write pure functions first. Okay, straight away you just write the pure functions rather than going for modifiers, because I may not be knowing what particular values I might require in future as a future reference values. So I recommend you write pure functions when it is reasonable, and you can change it to the modifiers or a modifying function only if there is some advantage. Okay, so I could say start start with pure functions. Okay, start with pure function, and modifiers only if there is a compelling advantage. Right? And this kind of programming, I call it as functional programming style. Remember this keyword. What do you mean by functional programming style? So any programmer will start with pure functions and resort modifiers only if there is a compelling advantage. So you begin with pure functions and then try to modify it. We call it as functional programming style. So now what do I mean by prototyping versus planning? So prototyping versus planning are a part of functional programming style. Okay, I repeat, it is a part of functional programming style. So what happens if, what do you mean by a prototype? Guys, you know a prototype like which will have some kind of an a certain input is given to a function or a project, and of course you have some expected outcomes or result from the project. You call it as a prototype. What if you need to do some changes with the prototype? Why? Because once you release that prototype, understand guys, once you release the prototype with some desired expectations or output, after getting some input, say if you are in an architect level or you are in a designer level, so what you do, you try to design a basic prototype of your model first. It usually happens with your project also. So you'll not be knowing like the constraints when it is exposed, when your prototype or model is exposed to a real-time situation. So what you do, you basically you try to design a prototype with a local constraint, some assumed constraint, and you started developing an algorithm or a model. You call it as a prototype. Now, what is planning? Prototype and patch. Planning is also called as patch. So this is also called in industry as prototype versus patch. Patch is nothing but a planning. Patch is nothing but an additional program or modified program which has been released as a patch. So what is patch? Sometimes you have observed, okay, you don't have a deep understanding of the problem. You just created a prototype. Then you started making an incremental corrections. And those incremental corrections will generate some set of code. Okay, understand guys? I repeat, those will generate some codes that is unnecessarily complicated. Guys, if you see this example here, when we started adding 2 times, okay, I just wanted to add these 2 times, started watching a movie at some particular time, and the movie length was some amount of time, and I got this as an actual input. Can you see the length of the program here? It may be a while loop or it may be a if loop, not a problem. Can you see the length of the program here? So again, it was modified here. Can you see this is a prototype? The prototype which I designed was simply adding 2 values. Then later I understand, oh, sum is exceeding, second is exceeding 60. What should I do? So then later I realized I replaced this by if, right? If sum dot second. Then again I realize, see all these realizations and you're trying to correct, which will generate another set piece of codes. You call it as a patch. So how long you are going to do it? Suppose if I say this as if it is a 24-hour format, if I say I started watching a movie at 11:41 and the duration of the movie length is um, say 12 hours 20 minutes and 30 seconds. So if I'm not watching a movie, rather if I'm watching a series. Okay. So now what is your suggestion, guys? What is your suggestion? So again, you would say, sir, I am getting 24 hours, 0 minutes and 31. So how could I calculate this? 24 hours is nothing but what? I'm going to the next day, right? I'm going to the next day. It is
Yes.
exceeding 1 day, correct? Hello.
Yes, sir.
So now again, so this will initiate another set of lines here. Guys, understand? This will initiate another set of line. What? Again, I have to check with the sum, right? I have to check with the sum here. I have to check with the sum. The same thing I have to do. Sum dot hover, correct? And now sum dot hover exceeds what? Exceeds 24. I have to reduce this by 24, and this will be the next day, right? So this will definitely work. I hope you accept this. Correct? Hello.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. So can you see now some unexpected codes has been added to correct these kind of errors. This is a simple time, a minute, hour, minute, second I am dealing with. But just imagine if it is a real time projects, or if you have a data been coming from different sensors, or the data has been received from different clients or users, and still you want to do something, right? So then it becomes this is like 3x or 4x kind of a problem, and then definitely it will increase the length of your programming. So what you need to do? Can you suggest what will you do? So I do basically a prototyping, and then the patch which I'm going to release definitely gives me an correctional codes. Okay, definitely it will be an incremental corrections which generate the codes which are unnecessarily complicated. So what is that you're going to do? So an alternative is to design the development. So I say designed development. Guys, remember this keywords. What do you mean by a designed development? So now you understood what do you mean by prototype versus patch. Now I am trying to make you people understand what you mean by designed development. So it is a high level insight to the problem. See, if you are trying to address to the problem, it is a higher level insight to the problem which can make the programming much easier. Okay, which can make a programming much easier. I just try to copy this, paste it here on the slide. Okay, so it is a high level insight into the problem. Can you give me the higher level insight to this problem? I'm dealing with the problem called time. So what is the higher level insight? So have you heard about 3-digit number in base 60? Have you heard about base 10? Base 10, guys, have you heard about base 10? Base 2, base 16.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so now I could say time can be represented as a 3-digit number in base 60. Is it okay? Is it okay? Where the
Yes,
first
sir.
digit, okay, where the first digit, or I could say, is it ones and 60s, and 60 square is 3600. Is it okay? So this deals with seconds, and this deals with minutes, and that is the second number deals with an hour. This is the first digit. I can represent the time object as the 3-digit number in base 60. This is the second digit, and this is a third digit. Is there any difficulty in understanding this? Guys, 1 second, 60 seconds takes 60 seconds makes 1 minute, 3600 seconds makes 1 hour. Any problem here in representing the time object in 3-digit number in base 60, where the first digit is unit, second digit is 60s, third digit is 3600s. Just like in your decimals, like in your numerical systems, if I can say 1 2 3 4 5, so what is this? 5 is unit, 4 is tens, 3 is 100, 2 is thousands, 1 is 10,000s. Very similar to that. If I write the time, if I give an example of time in 3-digit, if I say 1 2 3, so I could say this as seconds, this as minute, and this as hour. So I can represent this time in a 3-digit number in base 60. This is an example I've given here. The problem in understanding this?
No, sir.
Okay, fine. So now when we wrote add underscore time and increment, you understand? Here we have written add underscore time and increment. We had 2 different types of program. Where is that? Okay, here. You see this add underscore time and increment. Let me just copy this. This was an add underscore type, and also had increment somewhere here. It was written, yeah, here. I wrote this. And also guys, I would like to mention few things here. whatever that we are trying to deal is only with respect to time. Don't get confused that I'll always need to think something else. I'm just giving you the insight to how the time problem can be analyzed, and this is called as high level insight. This is called as high level insight to minimize these efforts of programming. Okay, so now when we wrote add underscore time and increment, we were effectively doing addition in base 60 here. You can see this. We did it with respect to base 60 only, with respect to 60 seconds, with respect to minutes. We just try to decrement the minute and increment the hour by 1, decrement the second and increment the minute by 1. You have done it, correct? You have done this very effectively. But I can also write the function, okay, to take an advantage. Okay, I can also write a function which converts time to integer. I'll convert the time to integer. Any problem in understanding this part of function? Define time to end. Time is an object here. Minutes is equal to time dot hour 60 into 60. I'm just trying to convert the given object time into minutes and seconds, and I'll return seconds. Seconds are returned with this function. And another function I will write which converts an integer to a time. After this, I'll write another function which converts an integer to, and convert it from integer to time again. Is any problem here? I've used div mod. What is this div mod? Recall, the div mod divides the first argument by the second and return the quotient and remainder as a tuple. If you want to understand this div mod separately, you can just do it like this. If I say 120, you could see 62s are 120, so 2, that is a quotient, is the first value of the tuple. 0 is the remainder, right? 0 is the remainder after division. So div mod gives me the result in tuple, which is a quotient and a remainder, where I am going to divide the first argument by the second argument, and I am going to get a tuple, that is a remainder, quotient as well as a remainder. So now I can easily convert this from integer to time. So this is a program which converts integer, some values, integer to time, and this converts time to integer. Correct? Is there any problem?
No, sir.
Okay, now why did I consider defining these functions? I considered defining these functions due to the higher level insight into the problem called time. Correct? Into the problem of time, because I could understand the time can be represented in 3-digit number in base 60. So what I will do, I will convert the given time to integer, and I will add the time and in terms of integer of base 60 and return the values in terms of seconds. Again, these returned values of seconds are given to integer to time. Why? Because I have to convert it back to time. Okay, so we will try to deal with this example in the next class. Make sure you understand this. Again, revise this concept before coming to my next class. What do you mean by design development? Design development is a high level insight, and this is much of specific to this example. Whatever we are trying to deal here, this is specific to time example. Don't get confused that always have to think same example for another examples or another problem. It will have its own a different way of representing the higher level concept, so you don't have to worry about it. Okay, so now time to integer and integer to time. So let me use these two functions in future in order to add and in order to address the problem of adding two different time objects. I think you're getting late to the next class. So yeah, this is all about today. So we shall try to discuss more about prototyping versus patch or planning in the next class. So thank you guys. Thank you for attending this session. Take care.